TYT, I'm Nomi Konst here in Detroit for the Women's Convention. So many women came out of that Women's March and said, I'm running for office. I've run for office. You know this.
Yeah.
You guys may not know this, but I ran for office 5 years ago. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And I love encouraging women to run for office, but I know you have to do it to learn for the next time if you don't, but it is tough. It's like starting a business. You need to know what you're getting into. There's investment. There's a financial, it puts pressure on your family. It puts pressure on your job if you're working. It puts pressure on your finances. It puts pressure on your psyche. You work with candidates all the time.
Yeah.
You work with female candidates all the time. I want to get real here. Like, what are the real obstacles? So people aren't going in blindly saying, yeah, I'm going to run for office. And there's all different types of office, clearly. Congressional, if you run for Congress, it's expensive. If you run for Senate, even more expensive. But school board, not as much so. So what are some of these obstacles that women need to be aware of before they jump in? And they're ready.
Absolutely. And I was actually just doing a candidate training. There were men, there were women. And one of the things I said to them was, listen, this is not glamorous. Whether you're a man or a woman, that's the truth. It appears sometimes from the outside that it's like this lovely fancy life and you get to go to events and you get to go to parties and whatever. It's not glamorous. It's hard. It's treacherous. Just like you said, it takes a toll on basically your entire life. And so then you add more complication on top of that if you're a woman, and then even more if you're a woman of color, and
a young woman.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The rules are not the same, and this is one of the things I think we collectively have to overcome and stop being apologetic for who we are and stop bending to those rules that apply to every, the rules apply to men in certain ways, not to women, and vice versa, and all these things. I mean, I'm sick of it. I think it's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's counterproductive. But if you're a woman and you get passionate, that's called one thing. If you're a man and you get passionate, it's called another thing. If you're a woman and you are and you work hard and you're very focused and you are insistent, that's called one thing. If you're a man, it's called a very different thing. And there's a negative and positive association to both. And you can guess, like, negative usually applied to women and positive usually applied to men. And so I think it's important, if you're running for office at all, to just be very realistic about it. But I think if you're running for office as a woman, to understand what kind of candidate do you want to be? And this has been a frustration of mine, having been a female operative in a very, very male-dominated space, that I'm going to tell on myself here. I feel like over all of these years, there have been times that I bent in ways that I should have, put my foot down and said, no, this is not okay. And you know what? I'm a bitch because I'm demanding. I'm going to call you out on it now. And it is something that's sometimes hard to identify because you're exhausted, you're going so fast, there's so much expected. All of these things are happening all at the same time, but now I have this recognition of it, and I'll be damned if I don't, if I'm not going to correct course here. And so my advice, I guess, whether you're a young woman or just a woman at all running for office, is decide what kind of candidate you want to be and stick to it. And everybody is going to have their own opinion.
Yes.
Actually, one of my really good friends just said, what sucks about what we do is if you're a surgeon, nobody goes up to the surgeon and says, you know how to do your job better? But everybody comes to us and says, let me tell you how to do it better. Everyone has an opinion. And, we're gracious and we listen and we, take what we need to and leave the rest. But it's true, being a woman running for office, you make a decision, decide on a strategy, decide on the candidate you want to be, and then stick to it. It doesn't matter what anybody else says.
It's interesting you say that, because I remember I was keeping a journal during my campaign, and I went to the last page of my journal from my campaign, and it was the day that I had announced that I was, no longer going to be running for office. it was a complicated race. So another story for another time.
Yeah.
But I wrote on there, lessons that I had learned. And the last lesson, the most important lesson was close your eyes and listen to your voice from now on. Because there were so many voices giving me conflicting messages, who to trust, not to trust, who to hire, especially as a first-time candidate. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know the rhythms as much. It's not ingrained in you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people you think you trust, but then don't trust. But for me in particular, I didn't take the space and the time to sit with myself.
Yeah.
And have my Oprah moment, right? Like close my eyes for 10 minutes and just kind of remember who I am, why I was in it. And I do it to this day. I still do it. I speak out on a lot of things that I think are some would say I'm being a little bold, but then you have a whole army of folks who say, I'm so glad that voice is out there speaking on my behalf. Now, it's important for people to hear that because it's not going to be easy. People are going to try to push your voice out of the room. They're not going to, trying to, get you removed from the table for speaking out. And funders. Well, I want to get to funding because that's a really important part of this is funders will want to hear a candidate sound a certain way. And so sometimes you see candidates kind of bend a little bit here, bend a little bit there. You see institutions do that. You see organizations do that start off in one way and then have to build. And so they start to bend and people start to bend as they realize it costs money. Now there is another way. Not everybody's Bernie Sanders. Not everybody can raise millions and millions and millions of dollars off of $27 donations. And that's something we have to be real about too.
Yeah.
Not everybody is Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
But how does a woman who is inspired to run right now, might be running, thinking about running, how do they make sure that they're viable, financially viable as a candidate so that they can receive institutional support, union support, whatever the support is from their community, especially if they don't come from wealth, if they're not wealthy themselves? Because let's be real, that's the big, nobody wants to talk about it, but that's the thing that stands in the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. And listen, the money in politics is obviously one of the biggest problems, I think, ahead of us. And campaign finance reform couldn't come fast enough because all that's doing is ensuring that it's the same cycle, the same families, the same wealthy people, the same wealthy donors who all get to put their finger on the scale. And, and the rest of us are trying to sort of navigate a way out of it. Well, we don't live in that land yet. Hopefully we will at some point. But I think the thing that I can say, you're right, everybody is not Bernie Sanders. But what he gave everybody, whether you supported him or not, doesn't even matter. We can all thank him because he made authenticity cool again.
Absolutely.
And,
I love that.
And I'm going to put it on a T-shirt. That's trademarked. But he really did. He made it to where being your authentic self is what resonates. He showed that that's what resonates with people. And so this is one of those easier said than done things sometimes, but my advice would be, no, you're not going to get all of that institutional money, and sometimes that's okay because they don't represent who you are and you don't represent who they are. Now, that's not to say every one of those organizations is bad or every PAC is bad or any of those kinds of things, but that's where it's so important to identify who aligns with you. And that's, I think, where things get lost because of how much money it takes. It's like, I'm just going to take it from wherever because it takes money to run races. But there are really great organizations out there doing really great work and raising money for good candidates. You just have to be a little bit more selective
and
strategic about exactly, because I always say it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? It's you start inching over a little bit because I've got to do this because I need to hire another staffer, I need to do this because it's going to help X, Y, or Z, and then all of a sudden you turn around and you are miles away from where you started, and it was just these incremental steps away. And unfortunately, that's not going to stop until we collectively go, okay, this is not what we stand for.
So with that being said, if anybody watching is thinking about running for office, what can they do now to prepare and strategize? I'm a big believer in having gone through a special election, which was a very fast situation. I had to make a decision very, very quickly and jump in. And there were a million mistakes that we made along the way. And some
Everybody
of them
does.
we couldn't prevent
Yeah.
because of the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But because so many folks are saying now, I'm going to run for office because of Trump, and then they just jump in, not understanding there are dynamics at play, there are other, there are forces, there are going to be people who are trying to push you out
Yeah.
because wait in line, you haven't done the work, and there's a lot of things that people will say.
Yeah.
But everybody deserves has the right to run for office in this country.
Definitely. Yeah.
So what can our audience do that, people who want to run for office, what can they do to prepare now? Say they want to run 2 months from now or 2 years or 10 years from now. What are some of the things that they can do?
Well, the operative side of me would say don't jump in if it's 2 months from now, because that's really complicated.
I would say the same thing.
But if you have a year and a half, 2 years, I think one of the most important things that sometimes doesn't happen is the conversation with self, but then also the conversation with the family and the people in your immediate vicinity, because it's going to affect them. Whether you're running for city council or U.S. Senate or whatever, it's going to affect them and their lives and your lives together. So I think having that conversation before you make that decision is really important. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who announced and then they found out that their spouse was like really not on board.
Are you kidding?
Oh no, not kidding. And it's like, okay, well, it happens,
Oops.
right?
Surprise,
Yeah.
honey.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing, too, I think that's really important is to understand what office do you want to run for and why. So I think another thing that happens, and it's partially because there's there's kind of a misunderstanding of civics in this country, like how do things work and all of that. And then there's also just a lot of passionate rolling around, understandably. I think understanding what each level of government does and where you fit in is really important, because if the most important thing to you is healthcare,
Right.
and you're running for, I don't know, county commissioner or something, that those are not going to be the things that you're working on. If you really, really care about gerrymandering, running for state, running for the legislature is a place for you to be. I think, and Nina Turner said this yesterday, and I couldn't agree more. I think sometimes people limit, and especially women, will limit themselves because of being prepared enough or whatever the case may be. I think what's most important is that you are running for the office where you're feeling led and where your heart is taking you versus, oh, I need to start here to get to here or whatever.
Sure.
I mean, all of those, yes, those used to be kind of the rules. All of that's out the window now, obviously, with the Cheeto in chief being where he is. But I think that's most important. And speaking specifically to women now, I mean, men, you can take this too, but trusting your gut, which we just don't do enough of. I think we could have a whole nother conversation about why that is, but listening to yourself, to your previous point, trusting your gut and your intuition is so important.
When should people start to build those alliances? I mean, a lot of folks do jump into races and don't have any political experience and haven't built the relationships on the ground, and they do just fine.
Yeah.
But more often than not, it is important to have relationships. Doesn't necessarily mean, with elected officials, but community relationships, a base, because you need to call on that base to show up for you. So when should people, and how should they start to get involved in preparation?
The people who are going to volunteer and show up for you are likely the people that you have had some kind of a relationship with. But the worst thing, and this is like 101 and it seems so obvious, but people do it all the time. If you haven't talked to somebody in 20 years, the first phone call they get from you, and you were buddies when you were kids, first phone call they get from you should not be to ask for money.
Right.
So I think the second that you start thinking about, I might run for office, start making that list. Like, who are those people that are in your world, in your vicinity, that you have had or still have relationships with that you can start reconnecting with? And then there's the organizational front. Who are the heads of these organizations in your community that you should know and want to know? And even if you aren't 100% sure, start having those conversations. I'm a relationship person, so I'm always like all about have those conversations, because relationships are always good. But I think that is one of the most important things. It's as soon as you decide, you should start thinking about who those people are and start reaching out. Again, not for money first.
Yeah.
Just to reconnect, and then build from there.
I mean, Bill Clinton was very famous for that. He he had lists that he had. I mean, granted, he wanted to be president probably from the time he was 4 years old, but he had these lists of childhood friends, and he would stay in contact with them for years and years and years. To this day, they still stay in contact with these folks, and he'd call them regularly and go through his list. He was very focused on that.
Yeah.
And there is something to be said about when you're serious about this, you have to be serious about it.
Yep.
It's
absolutely.
another job. It's another job where competitors are trying to take you down at the same time.
Yep, absolutely. It's very true. Yeah.
All right, so like parting words. What can we look forward to in the next few years? What kind of women do you see rising up and running for office?
I have to tell you, I think about what I was like when I was 20-something years old, and there is a lot of that. Some of the same things that I experienced in the negative are still being relayed to me from women who are now that age, which was sort of disheartening to me for a long time. But I'm also meeting all of these young women all across the country who are so much further along and have their eyes are so wide open. They listen to themselves. They trust their gut. And it's so beautiful and amazing and inspiring to me. And I would just say, keep that going.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say this enough. Trust yourself, trust your gut. Take the time, like you said, take the time with yourself and to be with yourself and not listen to all the chatter that's happening around you, because even people who love you and want the very, very best for you won't always give you the best advice.
Absolutely.
So you have to decide, again, who are you? What do you want? What are your goals? Why?
Yeah.
And stick to them.
My last words in response to that are one of the pieces of advice I would give people after my run for office is, as you just said, there's a lot of folks who might care for you, but they are going to project
Absolutely.
their issues on you. They have no idea what you're made of, what you've been through in every aspect, and where you're going. And the only person who knows that is you deep down inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
thank you, Rania. Rania Patrice.
Thank you. Thank you
pleasure.
very much.